Okay, hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today we have Aaron Lundgren from Planet and myself, Ben Munson from the Farm QA team, and we'll be talking to you about how to leverage Planet data in Farm QA to make agronomic decisions. And we'll be focusing in on specifically zone creation, prescription writing, but along the way be showing you more generically how the product works and how the imagery from Planet can be viewed and used in Farm QA. So before we dive in too far, we'll start with some intros. Myself, as I mentioned, Ben Munson with Farm QA.
My name is Aaron Lundgren. I'm account executive here at Planet Labs. We are an Earth observation company. And I want to move forward with the slide real quick, Ben. Thank you, sir. So yeah, a little bit about Planet Labs. We were founded in 2010, a group of engineers out of NASA and JPL. Grown considerably since then. We have now over 1,000 employees worldwide. We're traded publicly on the New York Stock Exchange. But one thing has been consistent through all the change and the growth that we've had, and that's our mission. And that's remained that we want to image the entire Earth every day and make that information visible and accessible to experts like yourself so you can take action based on what you're seeing. Thank you. And we do this through our satellites. So today we own and operate 2 different constellations of satellites here at Planet. On the left is our PlanetScope constellation. This is made up of about 200 what we call SuperDove satellites. Those are the names of the individual ones. These are small CubeSat satellites, so they're actually about the size of a loaf of bread. And they fly in a large array to map Earth's landmass every day at around 3.5 meter resolution. And now some interesting facts about PlanetScope. Each SuperDove circles the Earth in about 90 minutes. It captures multiple images per second in 8 different spectral bands. And every day we return around 4 million images back from these satellites. So a lot of data that we're processing. And then on the right side, we have what we call SkySat satellites. Now these are tasking satellites. Unlike PlanetScope that's always on, always monitoring, SkySat sits dormant until someone puts in a request to go out, take a shot of an area, and then we can return that back in about, as little as 12 to 24 hours, depending on where the area is. And those are actually 50 centimeters, so much higher resolution with SkySat than you get with any other satellites. So whether projects require daily imagery, high resolution, or both, our satellites can really cover anything. All right, so speaking of resolution, that's one thing that a lot of the folks that we work with say, the number of things that make our imagery unique, but really it comes down to spatial resolution and temporal resolution. That's where they find the most value. So we're looking at here, this example shows 3 images that were captured by different sensors at different spatial resolutions over the same area. This happens to be in Ireland. On the left-hand side, you're seeing an image captured by Sentinel-2. Here you can see it's hard to really detect landscape features, trees, tram lines in the fields, and just not a lot because we're looking at 10 meter resolution here. If you look in the center, this is the PlanetScope, imagery that we're capturing here. So this is 3.5 meter resolution. Here you can really start to see in-field growth anomalies. They will become visible. Tram lines start to pop out. You can even start to see things like trees, bushes. Those are becoming more evident in the center there. And then looking at the far right, here you're seeing our sub-meter resolution with SkySat. And here it's really easy to start seeing individual trees. You can start making out buildings, outbuildings, cars, things of that nature. All right, and then secondly, to spatial resolution is temporal resolution. So here what we're looking at is a calendar view that shows images of both Landsat and Sentinel captured over North Platte, Nebraska in September of 2019. Now combined, these providers only have 10 satellites, which is why the revisit rate's fairly low. And then we're only seeing about 4 days of usable imagery in this example. But if we move to the next slide, if we compare that to the same time period over the same area with our PlanetScope satellites, the difference becomes pretty stark. And since our PlanetScope satellites are always on, and we have over 200 of them in our constellations, you're getting a reliable stream of new data delivered on a near daily basis. Also note that Planet began imaging the Earth in 2016. So if you ever need to look at past images, you can tap into our extensive archives at any time. And utilizing Farm QA's platform, you can build a time series analysis in seconds to see changes over any period of time that you'd like, which Ben will show in the demonstration here in a bit. And so what does this mean for agriculture use cases? Well, having access to near daily imagery, especially during short growing seasons, means issues can be detected and addressed at the onset and really stop problems before they become unmanageable and spread. And also, when having higher resolution images used to create like vegetation indices, the results have much more granularity, which provides more insights and ultimately higher accuracy when creating variable rate zones and prescriptions. And I'll note that while the example on the right here shows NDVI, PlanetScope does have multiple spectral bands, so we support multiple different indices as well. All right, and lastly, we have really streamlined our data delivery here at Planet, and especially in the agriculture customers that we work with over the past few years. And we now offer this product called Acres Under Management, or AUM. And with AUM, you just have to tell us how many acres you want observed or how many acres you want us to return observations for, and we can deliver that directly to the platform of your choice. And with Farm QA, the transfer is really seamless. And you get both past and all current images of your fields populated in a matter of minutes. All right, and I'll turn it back to you, Ben. Thank you.
So with that, I will dive into the Farm QA side. So as Aaron mentioned, the Planet imagery that they offer can flow into a platform like ourselves. And so with that, I'll talk through what that looks like and showcase what we can then do with that data to provide value on top of the raw imagery itself. Before I dive too far in, I just mentioned, so Farm QA, we're an agronomy platform. What that means to us is we have a suite of digital tools that we are selling to the industry, but it's focused around data collection for the agronomist. So whether that's crop scouting, recommendation writing, they can then push that into reports back to growers. And along the way, we help them with soil sampling, crop planning, using imagery to direct their efforts in the fields to be efficient, with the end goal of making a producer more successful, making more data-driven decisions along the way. So that is who we are, what we provide, and we have a lot more functionality that we'll showcase today. So if you're interested in learning more about the platform as a whole, I would gladly discuss that with you. But for today, I want to just dive into a live demo of Farm QA, as I think that the product speaks for itself from that standpoint. So I'm going to transition over into showing our software. With this, we start you out on a map-centric view, like you're seeing here, with your field boundaries delineated, broken down by crops, by acreage, number of fields. And then we have a mobile application as well that runs on iOS, Android, that can be used for in-field data capture and also reporting out to growers. So what we'll focus on here is, Aaron mentioned that within Farm QA, it's very easy to get the Planet imagery to flow down to a field level. So the process of doing that, in Farm QA as an administrator, you can access a Planet integration page. So what you see here is something that would be set up in your Farm QA account. You'd have the option to choose from these different indexes. So Aaron mentioned Planet data. They have the PlanetScope data as the 8-band, and with that, we can calculate different indexes. NDVI may be the most common to you, but NDRE, MSavvy, Redband, and Red Edge are other common ones used for agricultural purposes. And so you can choose which of those you want to have processed per image that we'll bring into Farm QA. And then we'll track what we consider metrics on those images. And that is what allows us to chart out, let's say, your average NDVI line over the course of a season. From here, you have a dial that you can turn to control your cloud cover percentage, meaning that every image that's being captured from Planet, before we push it through and display that in Farm QA, we're going to check that for cloud cover percentage. So the data that you see, is quality data. Additionally, we expose the backfill filter to you. So what that means is, with Planet, you can backfill, let's say 5 years in this case. So you could choose a May 1st, 2018. And so the second you subscribe with Farm QA, set your backfill date, you'll have every quality image that hit your cloud cover percentage filter back to the selected date, and each of those images being processed for all the indexes chosen above. So with that, those are some of the preferences that you can control. From that point, we have a setup where you can control, you can enter in how many acres have been purchased. You can then consume those acres within Farm QA by choosing your fields. And as I do this, you can see the subtraction happening real time to your quota. So if I were to add 2 additional fields, I can choose this up north field, click update. The second I hit update, FarmQA will start pulling those images via an API, process for the index, and display them in the UI. So the point to be made here is you have a lot of control over being self-sufficient, controlling the filters, but then choosing the fields to subscribe and at that point use. So with that, again, that's more of an admin setup. Now any user in the system with access to the fields that have the imagery can now view that. That process can happen from the web or the mobile app. So starting from the web, if I view a series of fields, in this case, Western North Dakota, we have several fields that have been subscribed. Clicking on an individual field allows me to pull up my different layers. So in this case, when it pertains to imagery, layers are referring to your different indexes. So dynamic MSavvy, dynamic NDRE, for example. And so you can pick and choose what you're interested in seeing at any given time. But if I choose dynamic NDVI in this case, you can see the most recent image displays. And at the bottom, I have a time slider where I can view a series of images for that particular field. So the way this works, a few more basics of the interface, you have a time filter on the bottom. By default, you're looking at the entire season. If you want to trim that data up for whatever reason, you can use any one of those canned filters, or you can go custom. And for example, let's say you knew that there was an issue in the middle of July or August in this case, you could use a custom filter, choose those dates, and now this time slider is refined to just that period of time. So you can see that here. Now, the other thing I would mention too is you can play this. So if you want to see a time series just on loop, you can click play and see those images as it progresses through the season. Or you could see more real time as you move that dial. So I would also call out the load time. So we do cache these images. So as you slide through it the first time, they will load up, but then from there you can slide through fairly quick and see progressions across a field in a scenario like this. So those are some basic viewing controls. You can also toggle between indexes. So let's say at this point we want to now compare this to the visual image. If I choose visual, I now see that image with that date being held constant. So I would be able to toggle between visual versus dynamic and see that real-time difference with essentially no load speed as I toggle between those. So with that, that's some basic viewing options from the web. The other thing I would call out is with every image, I mentioned we track what we call metrics. And so if we slide down into the metrics section, I can see the average NDVI value for my most recent image, so 0.31. In the case of NDVI, that typically runs on a scale of 0 to 1, especially in an agricultural scenario, and so the data is going to fall in that range. But with every image, we will take all the pixels, find the average NDVI, and plot that over time. So what that gives you is essentially a growth profile for this field. So in this case, I can see that over time of the whole season at a glance. And so in combination with using that slider to visually look at the NDVI image, you can look at it more statistically, if you will, by looking at a trend line. In addition to that, you can break down images to see, where does the majority of those pixels fall within that the scale of 0 to 1. And then we also added in a by season view. So this gets fairly interesting to say, the last time we planted corn, how does this compare to that season? And so you can toggle on and off years so you can get a view like this to say your average NDVI growth profile for 23 compared to 21 when you may have had corn last. And so that's a way to very quickly and easily compare this year to say, is it better or worse than average? Maybe you know what you yielded that year, and you can have a rule of thumb estimate at what you're expecting to yield this year. Additionally, we'll average that, so you can see that this yellow, or the call it orange or yellow line, is representing the average across all years in our system. So you can see how this year plots to average. With that being said, so with the backfill, you get this type of view straight out of the gate. You don't have to use FarmQA for 5 years in the future. The backfill is going to provide this immediately. And then with that, you can generate a PNG if you want to send that out to a producer. You can download just that chart and send that out as a clean looking report. In that same breath, I'd say you can do those same charting options with any different index. And so what you're seeing here is a way to look at that data over time. The other thing I'll show is now we'll jump over to the mobile app and show if you're doing, let's say, in-field data collection, what does that viewing experience look like? So mobile app, again, runs on iOS, Android. You're seeing a map view again. A difference being is your GPS will be displayed on this mobile app. So you'd see where you are relative to any of these fields. On the mobile side, we allow you to sync your layers. And so what this is from this control, you can choose to pull down different your imagery layers and choose how far back you want to sync. So for example, if I wanted to say on my mobile phone, I want the last 150 days and just the NDVI images, I can set that time window, choose the indexes or choose the layers, and that will kick off a sync process. And it will actually pull those images down to my device. The reason that's important is because then that is available in offline use. So you can see we have an offline mode. So if you're scouting, you may say, you know, we do not have connectivity, but we still want those images to do something like directed scouting. That's what that layer sync preferences allows you to do. And in addition to that, let's say you are an agronomist in a co-op retail scenario, you can choose to just pull down the images for your growers, your region, without bogging down your mobile device with additional images. So with that, now that we have our layers or images pulled down, we can search for fields. We can work off a map or a list view to navigate down to the images we care about. But once we do that, if I click on this field, I now have the ability to see those images and slide through them in the same way I did from the web, but on a mobile phone. So the power here is you're physically standing in a field and you're looking to do some scouting, for example. You could find an image that you feel like represents the most variability or perhaps the most recent image. And then you can interact with that, meaning that you could zoom in, you could pan around and say, perhaps diagnose what's going on here in the southeast corner. And then that's where the value add functionality of FarmQA would allow you to do things like add an observation and say wild oat patch in or here, and take an image, notate in the map with what you're seeing, which would all be geolocated. So that is a use case for that imagery, is to slide through it, view it over time, and then do scouting notations based on that. The other thing to call out is with any of these images, you can view the different indexes as well on mobile. So it goes back to the sync preferences. If you pull down your NDRE and your MSavvy, you could see those on the mobile app just as you would your NDVI. So that's the mobile viewing experience that I would call out, so you can scout and see that. And then you also, we'll talk about generating zones and prescriptions, you can pull those final zones down and view them on the mobile side as well. So with that, I'll jump back to the web view and I'll show a few more things around what else we can do with that data besides just view it. We showed these trend lines, and so far we've talked about essentially one field at a time. You're looking at analyzing this field, what's going on. But you may have a scenario where you've got a lot of fields and you're trying to dictate where do we focus our efforts, where across a larger region. Within analytics, we allow you to start to do some of those assessments. And so what I will showcase here is within our analytics tool, we have a couple different views that may be of interest. One is on the report tab. You can see tabular data of all your average NDVI and NDRE values. So a scenario that may be used here is you can group this by crop. And what this will do is it will provide your average NDVI and NDRE values per crop, or this could be per region, per grower, per variety. So you depend how you want to slice that out. But then you can start to see how certain fields stack up relative to the average. a scenario here may be you're looking at harvest timing in beets, you're looking at it in hay or alfalfa. You can call out the fields that may be more prone or ready to be harvested. And then from this view, you can click in and get back to those charts to look at that data over a period of time. So that's one way to look at the raw data across a series or all fields. You can also chart out that data, but do it across fields. So in this case, what I'll refer to is each one of these lines is an individual field. So you can see how does F30 compare to Miss Howard's. And so that, again, harvest timing, looking for outliers, which fields might be dragging or lagging behind with a particular disease issue, can be more easily picked up on a time analysis like that. Additionally, you can chart out your different indexes. So an example with NDRE is mid-season NDVI might wash out, meaning that it gets oversaturated. You can't pick up differences, but the NDRE does pick up in that. So you can compare those lines side by side across a given field or a series of fields to start to look at how do different indexes help you make agronomic decisions. So that is a tool, again, looking at a series of fields as a co-op retailer, focusing your efforts based on looking at a mass amount of data, but simplifying it into consumable views and data sets. So the other thing I'll show from the map view, we just talked about viewing the trend lines and the data, but if you want to view the actual imagery across a series of fields at the same time, we do support that. So within our main map control, which is this left-hand panel, you can choose your index. So in my case, I'm going to choose dynamic NDVI again. But in this case, I'm going to view those images across all the fields in my particular view. So now what you're seeing here is if I look at these 3 fields, and again, this could be 100 fields, doesn't have to be 3, but I can slide across those images. And as they queue up, it'll load faster, but now I can slide across them and see differences across those fields over time. So that's another option here that we get asked for, is to say across broad acres, how do we consume, how do we make actionable decisions off the imagery? This is a tool for doing so. And then in addition to that, you could overlay things like your, perhaps you have scouting locations of where you saw issues. So that may be a scenario where you're looking for correlation between Cercospora and an NDVI drop or wild oats. And so you can display different multiple data sets on the same view like you're seeing here. Okay, so with that, the next step is to say, let's take action in the sense of creating management zones and prescriptions. The way we go about doing that is you select an individual field. And in our case, we're going to use dynamic NDVI to do so. So I'm going to come into my view where I can choose an individual image. And you can see how I can thumb through and choose those different images. And from here, we have a couple options. The 4 button allows me to create the zones, but I will also call out that you can download the raw images from here. So if you want the raw shapefile, the TIFF file, the PNG of just this particular point in time, you can download that and generate that as an output for other reasons. So creating management zones. From here, we've picked the image that we feel like represents the variability in the field. We can give this a name. So we're going to say webinar test 3. We have the option to put a description. So if you want a reminder for yourself 6 months down the road of why did I create these zones, you can put that in. You can choose to show zone labels in the end to say zone actually show 1, 2, 3 as the values, or leave that off. You can choose your clustering algorithm is what we call it. So this is how our algorithm, or how we're going to break down the planet pixels and group them. So equal interval is a good option for imagery in this case, so we'll leave that alone. But you can certainly read through in our interface the different options and what they entail. We allow you to set a minimum polygon size, so we'll say 1/10 of an acre. We want 5 zones. You have the option to choose your color palette or create a custom color palette. So that's been a big one where if people want to create their own palettes, you can use a color dropper and get exact hues on different zone shadings, and you can then save that out as a profile. So as you create, let's say, a custom setup that you want to use across 100 fields, you can then use this save as a profile button, and we'll say webinar profile, and we'll say this is for NDVI late season. Now for future zones, I can just choose that profile and it's going to reuse all of my settings. So it's a process of being efficient in the zone creation process. So from here, you can see that image, we just created zones. We slice that into zones that are grouped based on those NDVI pixels. And from here, you can see our breakpoints. So these values represent the NDVI ranges that are bucketed into those zones. You can adjust that. So if you want all of zone 1 to be larger, you could enter in that value and preview out that data. And then that entire zone would get larger. So as I do that, we'll see this zone get slightly larger in that sense. And so you can adjust those breakpoints as a whole. The other thing we allow you to do is you can edit the zones. And so in this case, we could dissolve, let's say we have a couple of zone, in this case, 1 or 0s that we want to be 1s. You can start to click through and dissolve out those zones like you're seeing here. So that's one option for customization. You can also break this down into a grid. So for applications, let's say your applicator can only operate off of 50-foot grids. So you can now slice these zones down into that grid size. You can change the orientation of your grid. And so then you can kind of perfect that so it lines up in the way you want it to. And then you can choose to slice that data. So if I do that, let's say 90-foot grids, and I'll click OK, it's going to take that zone map, break it into the individual grids. And the value of doing that is, for one, your machine may need the data in that format, but two, it also gives you more granularity in the ability to edit. So now we can more or less fine tune these zones now that we have more granularity around painting the cells. So with that, those are some edit options. At this point, we can create and save those zones off for future usage, or we can jump immediately into creating a prescription. So the way this works is the prescription writer. We allow you to enter in your attribute. So in this case, let's say we're going to apply urea. We allow you to do multi-attribute. So if you were going to apply both urea and potash at the same time, you can set up both attributes. On the next screen, you see your zone map that's been created. You can see your different zones. This is showing you your NDVI ranges that correspond to the zones, number of total acres in that zone, the percentage of the field represented, and then you have the opportunity to enter in your rates. So let's say for that lowest zone, I want to put in maybe my highest rate, so let's say 150. And the top end, the higher production zones, I'm going to put something lower like 50. But then I can autofill. So you can just, let's say you know your min and max, you can then autofill those ranges. And let's say on potash, I'm going 300 to 90, and I'm going to autofill. So that's the process of writing a prescription. It's pretty straightforward. But then with that, we're going to provide you with zone totals. So these are the total amount of urea and potash, respectively, along with what I'd call load totals. So across the entire field, the amount of product you're going to need for each urea and potash in this case. I can put a description here, so you could say for fall application. At this point, I can download, so I can say this will generate a shapefile that has that data in it, which we can load into my John Deere, put on a flash drive, push into a monitor. So that is machine ready, essentially on the Farm QA side into shapefiles. The other thing we can do with that is we can, let's say we do that across a series of fields. You can view all your prescriptions at once. So in this case, in this view, you're seeing all the prescriptions I've written. The one for fall application is the one that I just did now. And what I'll showcase here is that you can multi-select, so you could grab a series of prescriptions and you could export. One difference here is I could do an export to PDF, and this would generate a load sheet in a PDF format that I could then send to a grower for approval. So before I actually apply this, you could send this out to the producer, and this would have your logo on it. This is the field name, Miss Howard's in this case. This is the grower name, and then the field name followed by that, along with the data table. So referring back to those totals, so here's the potash total we need for this field. Here's the second field. In this case, it was urea. So you could do these, group these by product types. Maybe they're all potash, all urea, or a combination. But then this could be sent to a grower, or if you're doing custom applicating, use for yourself to get those totals. In addition to that, we get the request to say, take a series of fields and push that all into a single shapefile. So we can do that as well. So clicking multi-selecting there and pushing that to a shapefile. If we open that, we now see that all those files are nested within one RX file. And so now this is ready to go to load up, and then the applicator, the person that's in the cab, can choose across those fields which the corresponding shapefile to the field. So with that, that's the prescription writer. The goal is that it's very intuitive and easy to do in how that data would flow from viewing to zones to prescriptions, and then bulk exporting. So with that, Aaron also mentioned SkySat, so I'll quickly just touch on that on my side. So when it comes to, this is what I would call PlanetScope, the 3.5 meter, as Aaron mentioned, we do support on the Farm QA side SkySat. So that would be the high resolution 0.5 meter. The way this works in Farm QA is essentially identical, but I do have a field up here that has Sentinel loaded in for NDVI, the PlanetScope, and the SkySat. So as we thumb through that, you can see the resolution jump between each of those tiers. And what I would say on the value add side for Farm QA is the SkySat images are much larger collections. So you buy them in a minimum of 6,200 acre blocks, but then within Farm QA, we'll slice that down to a field level. So we'll do the clipping, we'll do the processing in the same way we handle the 3 meter data, so that in the end, you can have that SkySat high resolution imagery viewed in the same fashion you're viewing the 3.5 meter data, both on the web and on the mobile app. So that's something to keep in mind if you're interested in those higher resolution captures and doing it through a platform like ourselves. The other comment we get is going back to an existing field. So let's say we did create a prescription. Created zones. One thing I failed to mention is you can reuse those zones. So at a field level, I've created a series of zones that I want to use in future seasons. So this is the one that we did as part of our discussion here. So I now have the zones, and let's say I created these zones last fall, 2 falls ago. I can still reuse those to write a new urea prescription for the current year. And so it's the concept of reusing those, and if you can still edit and tweak those if needed. But now we've got a new prescription. Maybe need higher rates because you're going into a different crop. We can now download that. You've got a new prescription based on the same reused zones. So that's part of the tooling in here as well. And then you can upload existing zones as well. So if you just want to use a prescription writing tool, it's kind of a bring your own zone tool if you wish to use it in that way. Yeah, so with that, that's a majority of kind of the Planet functionality that we have. Clearly, we have additional abilities in Farm QA that we can talk through, but we'll focus the conversation on that for today. So with that, much appreciate your time for joining. Thanks for tuning in. And I'll kick it over to Aaron. Any last thoughts on your side?
No, thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate having you here, and yeah, look forward to hearing from you all.